Coming to paperback and e-readers this February, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers this February. I finally understand why David Carroll hangs the picture of Dr. Martin Luther King upside down. And when you really start to think about Dr. Martin Luther King and his civil rights movement, you will understand why it pretty much set the black race backwards. Now, the civil rights movement, when it first started, was a noble cause because it was all about getting black people equal protection under the law and equal rights under the law. Because when it comes down to rights of black people, we weren't getting what we deserved from the country. I mean, we were paying taxes into the American system, and we weren't getting equal services for the taxes we paid. I mean, many of these black-owned businesses paid lots of money in taxes, and they weren't getting the same municipal services from the local, state and local governments, such as garbage pickup, clean streets, safe streets, or quality public schools. So, in proportion to the taxes people were paying for these services, they were not getting equal service because it was separate and unequal. And then when you look at the judicial system, black men were being railroaded by the American legal system, and black women could not get justice from the legal system if they were assaulted by white people. And according to the laws, this was unequal and this was discriminatory. And even in municipal jobs, black people who paid taxes into the system could not get equal access to those civil service jobs. So when we look at the civil rights movement from that point, yes, it was a great social justice cause led by your Dr. Martin Luther King. And he was right to protest because we were not getting equal opportunity under the law when we think about all the taxes those black-owned businesses were paying into the system. When you think about the money black people in these black-owned businesses and working at these jobs were paying into the system, they should have had the same quality of life as white people when you think about it. Because with all these black-owned businesses in America, we should have had the same types of schools with the same types of learning materials and access to the same government areas such as courthouses, libraries, and other public institutions paid for by public funds from those taxes collected from those black-owned businesses and those black people who were working class who were paying taxes into the system. Where the civil rights movement went wrong was that it went from a movement about getting equal opportunity under the law to social acceptance by white people. And this is one of the things that happened once white people started infiltrating many of the civil rights organizations and started trying to control the movement. And many of these African Americans, because they were spellbound by the whole concept of the white man's ice being colder, came up with the idea of being accepted by white people instead of thinking about getting equal opportunity and equal economic opportunity and maintaining their economic and political base. Because when you look at the Asian community and you look at many other communities of color like Hispanics, they maintained their economic base, and it was all about getting equal rights under the law because they said they are paying taxes into the system, but they maintained and protected their economic base. But when it came down to the black community, under the leadership of Dr. King, he was focused on integration. And integration, when you think about it, was all about getting the validation and approval of white people, being accepted by white people, and in some ways being loved by white people. It was about social acceptance by white people, and it wasn't about getting equal opportunity under the law, equal protection under the law, and maintaining the equal distribution of resources under the law. Because if we look at your integration, it was the worst thing that happened to the black community, because instead of us getting equal opportunity from cases like Brown versus Board of Education, which said that schools had to be equal. If you look at that one case, you would see where the African American dysfunction pretty much lies, because it was all about black children going to white schools. Now, if these black leaders had any common sense, it would have been about getting equal economic resources for black schools so that they could be the equal of any white school in proportion to resources, so that they would have, new books and quality teachers in the black community, and that there would be a standard for education that was the equal of that of white schools. But because many of these African Americans believe that white is better, they were all about going to the white school. And that really wasn't what it should have been about. It should have been about black people who were paying taxes into the system, getting equal municipal resources for their schools, or having schools built that would make up for past discrimination in the education system. But because you're Dr. King and many of these civil rights leaders were all about white acceptance, they pretty much were focused on going to the white school, as if going to the white school meant something. And that's really not what it was about. If you look at things the right way, you'll sit there and say, look, why do I have to go to the white school, and why is the white school better? Instead of saying, look, why don't we try to get our resources better in our own school and hire our own teachers? That's what equal would be, because that's what equality really would have been about. But because African Americans still believe that the white man's ice is the coldest in the room, they believed going to the white school would be better. And then you also look at, where this whole civil rights movement went off the track, was this whole push to go into white stores. And you think about that, that's another backwards concept economically, because here we had an entire economy with black-owned businesses, and we had your Dr. King and many of these civil rights people talking about, we want to go sit at a Woolworth counter. Well, if Mr. Woolworth does not value my money, then he does not deserve to have an opportunity for me to spend my money with him. If he's telling me that there are no blacks allowed, then okay, I need to not go to that store. And this is the problem with the African Americans and the whole integration thing. You wanted to go places that you weren't wanted, and you wanted to spend money with people that didn't want your money. And that was a pretty backwards concept, because we look at that whole concept, and that was one of the things that pretty much derailed the black economy, was this whole integration thing, where you had the right to go to a racist store and spend your money with a racist, instead of saying, look, okay, these guys don't want my money, then I'm going to go over to Sam's store or Herbert's store, and I'm going to spend my money at his lunch counter and give him money and keep this money in my community. But according to your Dr. King, his idea was, his dream was, I get to go to this white store to give money to racists who don't want me in their presence and are just going to follow me around and profile me, and this is going to be considered progress. Just completely backwards when you think about it, because that's not progress. Progress would have been, I have the legal right to walk down this street without being harassed by a police officer just for being black to go to my own store. Or I can go out here and they have to hire a black police officer for my part of the community and protect my part of the community with those municipal funds that my taxes pay for. Because this is the whole thing that was discriminatory about, life when it comes down to black people back then, was that black people were the ones paying into this American system, paying taxes, and they were not getting equal services and equal representation in their own communities. They were not getting what they were paying for. And this is where your Dr. King pretty much went off the track, because this was not about making sure that everything was equal economically. It was about trying to get that social acceptance from white people. And that's where the civil rights movement pretty much went off the track, because integration wasn't about making sure that we were getting equal rights and equal protection under the law. it started being about being accepted by white people. And you could see that later on in the 1970s when it became about integration in the North and places like Boston where they were talking about busing the kids to school. Again, why do the African American kids have to go to a white school in order to be considered getting a quality education? Why couldn't funds be reallocated in a way where the money from for the whole state was equally distributed to inner city schools so that black children could have access to the same equal resources as their white counterparts? Why do they have to be bused? Again, that shows us how spellbound many in the civil rights movements were, and it was all about being with white people instead of about equal opportunity. Now, real equal opportunity, again, would have been about making sure that those kids had access to the same quality of books, the same types of teachers with the same educational levels, regardless of race, and making sure that the resources were equally distributed so that kids could get the same quality education at each school. That didn't happen because most of these people were all about going to the white school, which still got, disproportionate amount of resources, versus the black schools, which were still crumbling and falling apart because they didn't get the same types of resources, even though the civil rights movement said it was about fighting to get black children equal opportunity. And this is, again, why your Dr. King's civil rights movement pretty much is a long-term failure, because, yes, you got your Civil Rights Act passed, you got your Voting Rights Act passed, but it did not lead to equal economic opportunity overall, because the tax base for the black community was eroded because black people were more about social acceptance with white people and shopping at white stores and being able to go to places like Barney's to get themselves a serge suit, rather than making sure that their black economic base remained strong. Because it's like they had the black economic base there because they couldn't go to any place else. And then once they got white acceptance, the entire black economic base pretty much collapsed. And if that's the case, it shows us that it was like, the civil rights movement was the worst thing that happened to the black community, because it's like the black community was led into, as Dr. King himself said, was the master's burning house, because you pretty much you took the black community off the road of its own road to self-reliance, which is what should have been the overall goal of civil rights, was making sure that, again, we had the equal opportunity under the law, equal protection under the law, and equal access to government resources, because black people were paying for those resources. And when we look at the whole civil rights movement later on, when it became about white social acceptance, and because it became about white social acceptance, all the goals really were undermined for that movement, and the movement pretty much was lost. And that's why I cannot understand why David Carroll hangs the picture of Dr. Martin Luther King upside down, because Dr. King's leadership later on pretty much turned the black community upside down. And because it turned the community upside down, it's pretty much been regressing for the last 40 years instead of progressing. Because if you look at the picture of the black community, if it had maintained its economic base, it could have been as strong as the Asian community right now, where it does not need, any sort of political influence. It could have had its own industry, its own infrastructure, and they could have had, incredible economic power to the point where, they would be competing as like a separate country in the United States. But because the civil rights leaders just didn't have the vision or the ideas to approach it in a way that was focused more on economics, the entire movement pretty much turned the black community upside down with its approach, which was all about white acceptance, instead of making sure that blacks had equal rights under the law, equal protection under the law, and protecting and maintaining those equal rights and equal protections under the law to protect their economic base and to maintain their political base. And because your civil rights leaders didn't do that, we don't have a foundation for anything of substance in the black community right now. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.